Tuesday was the deadline for candidates to file for this election. We have some pretty interesting congressional races shaping up. Plus, the Democrats are hoping to gain control of the state house this year and will go local to Wayne County and the executive race that has some surprises there. And that's where we begin tonight with our contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, this is shaping up to be quite an election year. I mean, just looking at the congressional races, we have the vacancies on one hand, and then you have now some incumbents that are facing some pretty tough battles.
Yeah, it's the most intensely competitive congressional races we've seen here since the early 90s. It's, 4 open seats and an open Senate seat. It's, it really is living up to its billing, I think.
And a potential for a lot of turnover and quite a different looking congressional delegation from Michigan. And how does that translate into what kind of, I don't know, what can we see happen for our state?
Well, it'll get younger, right? For starters, we've got some pretty senior members of our delegation who are saying that, they're leaving. They'll be replaced by new, younger people who won't have as much influence at first, in Washington as they do now. But I actually think that's probably a good thing. I mean, you need to refresh the pool more frequently, I think, than we do or than we have recently here in Michigan.
It just feels like the bench has turned over all at once, I think, is what is really
That's what
has
happens
people
when people
talking.
stay, when so many people stay so long. And I'm not knocking any of the current delegation for as long as they've been. I mean, we have a very strong delegation. They just also happen to be very senior, and so that runs the risk of them all sort of leaving at one time, and then you get this massive turnover and loss of seniority.
But it's not just the open seats. We have some very competitive seats with incumbents in them. So you could get a turnover of half your delegation, 7 of the 14 or 8 of the 16, if things play out.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at a couple areas around the state. Let's look at the west side of the state. Justin Amash has a pretty strong challenger right now for an incumbent who thought that maybe he might be able to kind of skate through. Now he's facing a tough challenge.
I don't think he's ever that confident because he doesn't enjoy real good support out there amongst the
establishment, would you say?
Establishment, the money people, the folks who fund a campaign. They supported him in his first run. He's been a little too quirky, a little too unreliable for them. He votes no on most of the time, almost on everything. And there's a sense out there that he's not quite the right fit. And this challenger, Brian Ellis, businessman, very well funded. If you look at his financial reports, he is raising a ton of money out there. And he could give Amash a fight, although Amash draws a lot of national money. The Libertarians love him, and they pound a lot of money into that deal.
Well,
what do you think, Stephen?
And the DeVosses still really like Justin, right?
I'm not sure about that.
That was how he got
that
seat in the first place. And
I don't think you can say that.
You don't feel like that'll hold up for him?
I wouldn't say
I still always fall back on it. It is really hard to defeat an incumbent member of Congress. I mean, the amount of money, the amount of support you need is phenomenal, and these races have become $1 million plus races. Amash is. You can say what you want about Amash and his sort of quirkiness and his libertarian streak, but he is exactly what he said he was going to be. I mean, he never misrepresented himself as being anything else. So I don't know that voters really have much to complain about. This is who he is. And
voters always complain.
Well,
I don't think you're ever going to get around that. But I think another incumbent who's never changed what he's been or has always represented himself as he is Kerry Benevolio, and looking at the 11th. But I think that there is a strong possibility that Dave Trott, and I'm starting to see those commercials on all the time, and he's got the money behind him as well.
Dave does have a lot of money, and he's going to spend a lot of money in that race. You could see that race go to $2-3 million, which is incredible for a congressional race. It's going to be a tough fight for him because Benevolio, even though he was sort of the accidental congressman, he wasn't anybody's choice. He was there by default when McCotter blew up last time around, but he hasn't really hurt himself in Congress. He has not been the spectacle people thought. People thought he'd go up there, be Mr. Goofball. He's been very quiet. He's voted most of the time with the party leaders. I think, it's going to be a tougher race than we thought it might be 2 years ago. I think 2 years ago we thought, well, he's a one and done guy, but I think that's going to be a very
It's hard to get
interesting
someone
race.
out of that seat. Now, the time to do it is that first re-election,
Yeah.
right? If you can make a real strong run against someone who's only been there 2 years, you can sometimes get him out. But if Benevolio gets this win, I think,
Then
he could be
Republicans have to start learning to love him.
That's
because
right.
he's
He
gonna
could
be
be a
the
long-time occupant of that seat.
A couple of other incumbent challenges. Benishek also facing some Tea Party challenge, and John Conyers is facing perhaps maybe the stiffest challenge that he has in a while in Horace Sheffield.
Well, Benishek's sitting in a Democratic seat, and he's now won it twice, which goes to Steve's point. After that first time, it's hard to, unseat them. But I think this might be a little different. In that district is a traditional Democratic district. It was drawn heavily Democratic.
It was.
And yet Benishek still held it. He won 2010, held it in 2012. He's got a tough Democratic challenger this time. I think if there's going to be a flip, that would be the race I would watch for a flip. John Conyers, I'm not sure Horace Sheffield is willing to raise and spend the sort of money it's going to take to defeat him.
What sort of money is that?
I would think you'd have to spend $1 million, $1.5 million in
Yeah,
that race.
probably.
And I don't think he's prepared.
I don't think he
to
can
raise
get that much. The one thing I will say about Horace Sheffield is, I am never quick to count him out. He will outwork everybody in terms of the door knocking, in terms of the organizing, in terms of getting the votes out on election day. That's how he helped his daughter win that city council seat, which she probably should have lost. She was running against a much better known opponent with a clearer record, but she outworked him in the district, and I wouldn't count Horace out for that reason.
And he's willing to attack.
He is. That's right.
Previously, people have taken on Conyers, and it's been, very reverent. Oh, it's, he's our hero, he's an icon, and all of that. And let's not say, but it's just time for him to go. Sheffield's flat out going after him,
he's
saying,
after him.
he stays so long now, he's senile, he doesn't know where he's at. We've got a congressman who sleeps and what have you. He's willing to
and that could play very differently with voters up north in the first. Benishek, I think, has been an anomaly in the sense of his ability to hold that seat, even in an Obama year, right? I think he holds it again because of money. I think the Democratic challenger is really strong, but is not going to be able to raise the money.
But it's one of 20 races Democrats
are
nationally have targeted.
Absolutely.
They're going to put national money into that
It's
race.
their seat. They should have it. But some Democrats inside the party have even told me they don't expect that to flip.
It is
They'll
tough.
be able to get
But
it.
It's too hard to
they're
get somebody out of the seat.
They're also targeting Wahlberg. There's two.
See, and that
two
one
in
they don't
Michigan.
really have a shot at.
All right, I want to take a look
I
at
would
some.
agree with that.
I want
I
to take a
think
look at some of the
Wahlberg holds that seat.
open seats that we have going on here. Looking at Mike Rogers, Dave Camp, and Gary Peters, because he's shifting over now to run for Senate. Hanson Clark filed at the last minute, former congressman. Has
my
that
neighbor.
and your and your neighbor? So maybe you have some insight on how that changes the race for that seat.
I have not been able to make much sense of that race. You've seen people come in and out of it for several months, or say they were in and out of it. Burt Johnson, state senator, who ran against Conyers last time, switched and says he's going to run in this district this time. Now he says he's not running. He's going to run for state senate again, and I think it's because the field's really crowded with people who can't draw enough distinctions among themselves. They're all pretty.
So
does that
evenly
push a former
qualified.
congressman though ahead?
Well, I don't know.
don't
The
know.
question is, does Hanson Clark have sort of the advantage of incumbency, given that he held that seat, lost it when it was
it got
redrawn?
redrawn.
But Hanson Clark's got a lot of support in that district,
He does.
particularly the suburban portions of it. It's a well-known name. I think he's got to be considered the favorite there. Brenda Lawrence is going to be tough, of course.
Yeah.
She comes from a good base. And then Rudy Hobbs is the other one, I think, who has a pretty good chance, a state lawmaker from Detroit who's been working this for a long time.
The thing in that district that was interesting last time when it was Hanson Clark against Gary Peters, Hanson lost pretty handily, but if you looked at just the city of Detroit, he killed Gary Peters. I mean, he really, really crushed him, and he has a lot of Detroit support. This could end up being another instance of city versus suburb in a district that encompasses part of the city and a lot of the suburbs. But this time what's different is the candidates will all be African American.
Right.
And this may be where you see the African American support in the suburbs, in Oakland County and Southfield in particular, sort of assert itself as wanting somebody who's not from the city to represent them in Washington.
All right, in the short time that we have left, I want to take a look at a couple of things. I want to take a look at the state house races. Democrats are gunning to get a majority in the state house. They said they are fielding candidates in all 110 races. And plus you have some open seats up for grabs because of term limits. How possible is that, Nolan? Do you believe that Democrats will be able to take the majority?
Very slim in a midterm election that's reading at this moment like it's going to be a good year for Republicans. I think it's going to be hard. They may turn some seats. I don't think they take a majority.
They'll get closer, but
they'll get a little closer, but I don't think they take a majority. In fact, it may go the other way. Republicans may stretch out the lead depending how close this election is to 2010.
You say a good year for Republicans, but are we looking at some potential infighting with Tea Party candidates who are challenging some Republicans because of various issues they voted on over the past 2 years, including Medicaid expansion?
I see a whole lot of that going on in Michigan. I don't think that's going to play out.
Well, and the problem is that the way the districts are drawn, and again, we had this unholy gerrymandering go on in 2010, which we had not seen.
That's the first time that
it was. I mean, we never
Democrats
have had.
Never
we
did
have.
That.
Well, Democrats haven't drawn a map in Michigan for quite some time.
Elections have consequences.
But we have never seen the kind of gerrymandering that we did last time in Michigan.
So you don't think that we're going to have very much party movement?
They drew safe seats, right? And safe seats for both parties. The seats that are Democratic are likely to stay that way. The seats that are Republican are likely to stay that way. Now, of course, if you look at the overall votes, something like 400,000 more votes were cast for Democratic candidates than for Republicans, even though the Republicans retained the majority, but that's who drew the map. I'm not complaining about it. That's the way the rules work.
You complain about it every week, Steve. Good night.
But
there's no such thing
that
as
makes
a safe
no
seat.
sense.
Yep.
And redrawing is a guesstimate at best. With with the growing number of independent, non-aligned voters, it's ridiculous to say a district is 55-45 when you have that independent middle that shifts from one way to the other each election cycle. And we saw throughout the last decade how redistricting did not save an advantage for one party or the other.
All right, Wayne County executive race. I'm going to get a little hyper-local here. I mean, who isn't running for Wayne County executive?
I'm not.
Okay, Steve's not, but Warren Evans, the former sheriff and police chief, is now running, and Bob Ficano is back in the race.
That's going to be an interesting race with Warren Evans in it, because Evans is Duggan's man, whether Duggan steps up and actively participates in the race or not.
Is he going to?
I don't know. I mean, his position's a little odd being under the emergency manager law still, but he could. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. And Evans is his man, but man, the more people that got in that race, each new filer added to the odds to Ficano winning, just simply because of name recognition.
So a big field is a good thing for the incumbent.
Helps the incumbent.
Always.
It always helps the incumbent. I am surprised to see Warren Evans in that race, if not for the Duggan factor. I think that's what that is about. I think the mayor feels like he needs more of a partner at that level, and he's looking toward, not now, but 2015 or 16 when he really does have control over the entire city. I would be shocked if he didn't really come out and try to help.
Yeah, if you got him in, he's going to have to get him elected.
Yeah.
And that'll be interesting. And then this whole boss Mike persona will be,
that's how he does
interesting to watch.